Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. And I am back. This is Liam Blake, host of the History and Heritage podcast. Now, if you follow my Instagram, which is Liam Blake Podcaster, if you don't, you should, you will have seen that when I left off, I said I would be coming back on January the 28th, something potentially very interesting. And that potentially very interesting thing I can reveal now is that I plan to do most of my episodes as monologue episodes, which is basically just me talking about historical events. Don't particularly like it, I'm not particularly good at it, but with the power of editing and experience, I guess, I will hopefully get good enough that people will keep listening. I will have experts every so often, but they will be more of an occasional occurrence, I guess. I do hope to possibly at some point have a co-host, but that might be a good while in the future because I just couldn't find one. Right, into the subject of today's matter, which is, I was going to call it Murder in the Mountains, but so I'll say Mystery in the Mountains because, yeah, it's a mystery. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it's the Dyatlov Pass incident. So I'm going to take you back all the way to January 1959, a long time ago. 66 years ago almost. And Russia, well, it's now Russia, it was the USSR at the time, where the Ural Polytechnical Institute was in a place called Sverdlovsk, which is now known as Yekaterinburg. And they decided to select experienced mountaineers and skiers to go on just a trip or an expedition out to an area of the Ural Mountains known as Mount Otorten, which, funny enough, in Mansi, it was the local tribe, and in their language it means don't go there. So, you think they could have known not to go there? They didn't. Anyhow, they selected experienced mountaineers and skiers, and all of them were training for their level 3 mountaineering license, which was the highest you could get. The average age of the hikers was 24 years old. Roughly. This is brought up massively by Zolotaryov, who's a guy we'll talk about later on, Selian Zolotaryov, who was 38 years old. We'll talk about him later on because he's interesting. Anyways, there was a mix of engineering students, physics students, and radio technology students. And when I get to what the problems were, you'd think those particularly would have been able to sort it out. Spoiler alert, didn't go well, and it's now called the Dyatlov Pass incident. And it was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old, which is very young. Like, I'm 23. He was a respected student in the university or institute, and he was also just an all-round experienced mountaineer. He was only 23, and Igor Dyatlov gave his name to the area, which is now called the Dyatlov Pass. Funny enough, they knew when they were planning that it was a winter mountain expedition category 3, which is the highest difficulty, so they kind of knew what they were going in for. Plus with the whole, Mount Otorten, don't go there thing. Their planned journey was a 16-day journey through the northern Urals and then come back to Yekaterinburg and go, yay, we made it through. But they didn't. It's not like they skimped on preparations either. They spent weeks planning their skis, their tents, their clothing and their cooking gear and other things like that, and also made detailed route maps and made a very detailed supply caching strategy. All of these details can be found in books and articles, which I will have listed down in the show notes. So I'm going to skip forward a little bit to January 23rd, 1959. This is the day that they left. They left to head to Mount Otorten, or towards Mount Otorten anyway, which is where they planned to go. There was 10 original members. There was Igor Dyatlov, who was 23, he was the leader. There was Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, who was a woman, Georgy Krivonishenko, who was 23, Dubinina was 20. Georgy Krivonishenko was 23. Alexander Kolevatov was 24. Zenaida Kolmogrova, who is another woman, was 22. Rustem Slobodin was 23. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol was 23 again. Semyon Zolotaryov, who we'll get to, was 38. And Yuri Yudin was only 21 years old. interesting fact about Yuri Yudin comes up later. They departed from Sverdlovsk on that day. Sverdlovsk is now known as Yekaterinburg, but we'll call it Sverdlovsk for the majority of this. They departed by train on that day at roughly 9:05. Their destination was a place more northern than they were, still in Sverdlovsk or Yekaterinburg, called Ivdel. They were all excited, they were singing songs, and Krivonishenko was even playing the mandolin, according to reports. The last photographs were taken at Sverdlovsk train station. So that was, as I said, January 23rd. Moved then between January 25th and 27th, things already kind of getting a bit sketchy. They arrive in Ivdel by train on January 25th and take a truck to Vizhai, which is the last inhabited town or settlement that they visit. Then they rest there for the next day, which is January 26th, and then on January 27th begin their ski trek from Vizhai to Mount Tartan. And Dyatlov informed a local sports club in Vizhai that they would return by February the 12th. January 28th. This is the thing I mentioned about Yuri Yudin. Yuri Yudin got sciatica and joint pain and left. Yudin felt something was off, funnily enough, which it was, as you will see. However, as I said, those photographs actually were in the station, were the last public photographs, I guess. But Yudin took a few group photos, kind of like the 1959 version of a selfie. And these were the last images of the team alive. That was before he left. The team is now down to 9 members. Nothing important really happens between 29th and 30th. But then January 31st, 1959, they reach the edge of the highland kind of plateau area and the weather starts going down dramatically. The temperature dropped from kind of, I guess, normally survivable, kind of low, all the way down to -15 to -18 degrees. And they had to navigate through taiga and tundra, which are tiny, low grasses, low plants, and a lot of snow. The team then decided to keep some of their supplies in the forest for when they got back, in case they ran out of supplies while they were in the mountain. And they prepared for their journey to higher altitudes, and the last diary entries mention that the weather was getting even worse than it already was. Bring it forward to the next day, February 1st, 1959, and something went wrong. Well, not went wrong. So, as I was saying, the worsening weather, we think it caused them to deviate their route west. So instead of climbing Mount Tartan, they started climbing a mountain called Golat Shakel. It's the best pronunciation I could find. Which in Mansi, again, the Mansi tribe, means Dead Mountain. So that's like going from don't go there to Dead Mountain isn't much of a improvement. Anyhow, they decided to set up their camp on that slope instead of forested area. As we will see, that was a fatal mistake. Around 5 p.m. on that day, they set up their camp. And local reports from roughly nearby in that area, the visibility was near zero, the wind speeds were going up, and the temperatures had dropped to between -25 and -30 degrees Celsius. Just in case you're from America and I didn't mention it earlier, this is Celsius. This is where, as I said, the diary is gone. The diary entries, everything, any definite theories are out the window, because we haven't a clue what happened. However, between kind of 9 and 11, from the evidence that the search teams found, we believe that the tent was cut open from the inside with knives, and all 9 people exited in a hurry. Some of them weren't dressed properly, some of them had socks only, some of them were barefoot. They left behind crucial supplies like their shoes and their coats and their sleeping bags, but the forests showed controlled descent towards the forest edge. So, as I was saying, they could have been going towards their cache of supplies. However, they didn't really get there. Because, this is any time between February the 2nd and the 11th. but it's probably starting in the early hours of February the 2nd, but nobody's 100% sure. So basically what happens was the group split up in the darkness. They probably just got disorientated because it was so dark. That northern latitude, it would have been dark like most of the day at that time. Some apparently attempted to return to their tent, and then others, again apparently according to a few of the theories, tried to establish a shelter within the forest. As I said, it was minus 25 to minus 30 at the time, so massive cold and wind chill factors. So again, ages back, when they were back in the last inhabited village, Dyatlov said he would give an email or a message, I guess, to the sports club, which he didn't on February 12th. And then the alarm was raised almost instantly because he didn't. The institute, at this point, the institute and obviously the families were beginning to worry that something had gone on. The initial assumptions were minor delay, maybe they got lost somewhere but then got back on track, or maybe there was too heavy snowfall so they had to wait it out for a day or something. Wait then a further 8 days till February 20th, 1959, where there was a search party formed, and this is one of those things where everybody banded together. There was volunteers from the institute, there was Mansi hunters, and even the Russian army apparently joined in. And again, with the army, they deployed aircraft and helicopters for an aerial search of the area. It took them 6 days to make their first discoveries, which again, just to remind you, low light, not much light, and also really, really, really cold at the time. So like this was tough conditions to even search, never mind hike. They found the tent on the 26th of February. It was partially collapsed and snow covered. It was cut open from the inside, slashes made by multiple knives, they know that for a fact, and all of the group's belongings, as I said again, were inside, even cameras, diaries, that kind of thing. Food and supplies were completely untouched, which means that they most likely got to the mountain, and as soon as they got to the mountain they had to go. And there was even a flashlight on top of the tent somehow, so whether it was forgotten and when they were getting in, nobody's 100% sure. The first bodies that were found were Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. They were 1.5 kilometers downslope from the tent near a large cedar tree. But the weird thing was they were barefoot and in their underwear. Now this is probably due to a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. Paradoxical undressing is where people suffering from hypothermia can feel like they're burning up and therefore strip off. There were signs of the attempt to climb the tree, and the branches were broken up as far as 5 meters, so it looks like they tried to climb the tree to get either out of the cold or away from whatever got them out of the tent. And the branches were broken up to 5 meters, which means they got up quite high, and there was remains of a small fire, so they obviously did feel cold and tried to stay warm. However, fast forward then to the next day, the other 3 more of the bodies were discovered. Igor Dyatlov, he was 300 meters away from the tree when he fell. Zinaida Kolmogorova was 630 meters, so she was 330 meters further back towards the tent, and she was going towards the tent, as was Igor Dyatlov, or facing towards the tent. And Rustam Slobodin then were 480 meters from the tree towards the tent, or was. Interestingly, because they were frozen in time and died very suddenly, all 3 were in poses suggesting they were trying to go back to the tent rather than escape in any other way. Then it gets even nastier. So we have 5 members found of the 9, and on May 4th, 1959, which is a month and a half roughly afterwards, there was a ravine found 75 meters away from the cedar tree, and the 4 remaining members were found dead in that area. So I'm talking about Ludmila Dubnina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. This is get kind of weird, because some of them were better dressed than others, which kind of suggested to many at the time that those that had survived slightly longer than the first had taken their clothes from the dead other hikers. And this, okay, if you're squeamish, skip forward about 30 seconds. Ludmila Dubnina was not fully, didn't fully have her body. She was missing part of her tongue, or she was missing all of her tongue, part of her eyes, and parts of her face. Like around her cheeks, they're gone. Which is just, anyhow. So that was the end of finding the bodies. So between May and June then, in 1959, the experts were called in and did some forensic analysis. The USSR official documents, so it's not 100% certain it's true, but it should be. 6 officially died from hypothermia. 3 of the Ravine group died from extreme physical trauma. This is where it gets even more interesting than interesting. So Dubnina and Zoltaryev had major chest fractures, and Thibaut Brignol had severe skull damage. However, right, so that could obviously mean they fell down the ravine and fell to their deaths. Like they slipped, whatever. Or snow gave way. But there wasn't any snow around them or signs of an avalanche like that. And also, there was nothing outwardly to say that they had any wounds. So the injuries were said to be comparable to car crash victims. But there wasn't a single scratch on them externally. So this was all done after like x-rays and stuff that they found these internal wounds. Now it gets, I said now it gets weird quite a lot. But it gets really, really weird. So the skin on some of the victims and the hair had been tinged grey and orange, which is really weird. And there was high levels of radioactivity, including beta particles, on some of the clothing, which gives rise to some of the conspiracy theories that I'll talk about in a minute. There was no sign of any struggle or presence of other humans, so what on earth caused them to, leg it? And the last campfire remains show that there was unused wood nearby, so they had planned for a longer fire. So what happened so suddenly? The official investigation closure was May 28th, 1959, and the conclusion was a very satisfying, compelling unknown force. That very satisfying, by the way, was sarcasm. The case files were classified and the location was closed to the public for years, so it was just kind of pushed under the carpet. However, it was reopened in 2019 when the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case, and the official conclusion pointed towards avalanche theory. I will get onto the avalanche theory in a minute or two, and all the other theories. That'll be in the next part. I'll give you a little bit of a break of like 10 seconds. And this theory was supported by Swiss researchers from Zurich, who I will talk about more again when I talk about the avalanche theory. But overall, this place has had a massive legacy and cultural impact, ranging from the unfortunate Igor Dyatlov giving his name to the pass, to there was books about it, documentaries, many of them, even on YouTube, look up Dyatlov Pass, and there's like hour-long documentaries on it. Brilliant. And there was even 1 or 2 films produced about it. There's annual expeditions to the site by enthusiasts and researchers, because it's not quite as dangerous now because they're slightly more well prepared. But here we go. This is the bit that I find interesting. There are official, in inverted commas, theories, and also conspiracy theories. Right, it's time to explore the theories, starting with the one I mentioned, the avalanche theory. This avalanche theory says that a slab avalanche, which is a type of avalanche where a cohesive slab of snow breaks away and slides down the slope, occurred on the slope of Kola, which is Dead Mountain. The hikers, startled by this event, cut their way out of the tent from the inside, apparently. The original idea was that a sudden avalanche startled the hikers, causing them to flee in panic. This was based on the fact that the tent was cut open from the inside, and they left with inadequate clothing and shoes. A later investigation suggested that a combination of heavy snowfall, high winds, and the group's actions in digging the tent site weakened the snow base, leading to a snowslide that pushed against the tent, causing panic. The group then split up and sought shelter, ultimately succumbing to the elements. This revised version attempts to address the lack of evidence of a large, sudden avalanche, and the fact that the hikers would likely have chosen a location that was not in an avalanche path. There is scientific support for this evidence from 2021, where a study from scientists from EPFL and ETH, both in Zurich, used computer simulations to support the idea that a small slab avalanche could have caused the 10th damage and the injuries. They used analytical models to show how a small avalanche could have caused the injuries. The researchers used terrain-related physics to analyse the area and assess the likelihood of avalanches. Expeditions to the Dyatlov Pass after the publication of this study supported the idea that the area is prone to avalanches and the slopes are steep enough for these. The supporting evidence for the slab theory in general is the tent damage. The tent was cut open from the inside, suggesting a sudden need for escape, which aligns with the revised avalanche theory. And then the emergency response, like the group's actions after leaving the tent, seeking shelter, starting a fire, and that's exactly how experienced mountaineers would have reacted during an avalanche. In 2020, the official conclusion was that Russian authorities cited an avalanche as the official cause of death, supporting the theory even further. However, there is contradictory evidence, such as debris patterns or damage to the tree line. The unlikely location, because at the time, although this has been disproved, at the time, the area was not considered prone to avalanches, and studies showed it was unlikely for an avalanche to have occurred there. The tent orientation also. The tent wasn't collapsed fully or in a way that was consistent with an avalanche. And the expertise of the hikers was also kind of threw people off, I guess. The group, especially, as we said, Dyatlov and the older fellas, Zolotaryov, were experienced hikers who would probably not have camped straight in an avalanche path if they knew that an avalanche could occur. And then all the footprints were organised and in a single file, not sporadic as if fleeing in panic as well. So that's another contradiction. But then also the injuries. This theory couldn't really explain why the bone fractures happened without any soft tissue damage or external injuries. And also the bodies found earlier on were covered by a shallow layer of snow, which is inconsistent with the avalanche powerful enough to sweep away the other bodies. Then we're going to get onto a theory that I don't even want to read out because it's the katabatic wind theory, and katabatic is just really hard to say. This theory is that a katabatic wind, which is a rare but powerful event, could have made it impossible for the hikers to stay in their tent, causing them to seek shelter behind the tree line. Katabatic winds are winds that carry high-density air from a higher elevation down a slope due to gravity. Supporting evidence to this is a similar disaster that happened in the Anaris mountain in Sweden, where katabatic winds killed 8 hikers in 1978, which is, in case you didn't know, 19 years later. However, there is unclear evidence for this, and therefore it is also somewhat discounted, because a flashlight, as we said, was found on top of the tent, suggesting that the hikers wanted to return, and then if they were fleeing really quickly like that, they mightn't have left on top of the tent, the flashlight. The injury as well, the theory says that some of the injuries were caused by the shelter collapsing, but this is not a direct match for the specific injuries like the skull fractures without any external. And the nail in this one's coffin is the fact that katabatic winds generally don't occur in that area of Yekaterinburg. This one now is interesting. It's still weather related, but it's still physics related, and it's known as the infrasound theory. Infrasound, which is a low frequency sound wave, is generated by wind and could have induced panic and disorientation, causing the hikers to flee their tent. This theory suggests that a Kármán vortex, which is a repeating pattern of swirling vortices caused by the unsteady separation of fluid flow around blunt bodies was created by wind going around Kolachakal, which is Dead Mountain, the mountain that they were on. The supporting evidence is the panicked response. This could have explained this theory, particularly the fact that they think it went around the mountain, could explain why they were freaked out so quickly and had to flee in a disorganized manner. But there are contradictory evidence because the theory doesn't explain those fractures and some of the other injuries, particularly, as I said, the fractures and the missing tongue and cheekbones and stuff, or cheek flesh and stuff that I mentioned earlier, and eyes. It is unlikely as well that all 9 of the hikers would have experienced the same phenomena in the same way and reacted in the exact same way. And there's also a lack of physical evidence because there's no direct evidence that infrasound was actually present that night, or that it would cause such extreme effects, or that it's common in the area. Now we get really kind of conspiracy theory-ish. Military tests theory, here we go. This one says that the hikers were caught in a military testing accident, probably in parachute mines, which is a mine that is flown from a plane and then explodes in the air. The supporting evidence for this is there are records of parachute mines being tested in the area around that time, so that is possible. The injuries, such as the severe internal injuries without external wounds, are consistent with the concussive force of a mine explosion, and the high levels of radiation are also explicable, I guess, by potential bombs. There were glowing spheres seen in the sky around the same area and same time period by other people. And finally, the nailing down of this one, there was a complete suppression of the case by the Soviet government in regards to investigating what happened. So this could indicate a cover-up of a military incident. Now on to the contradictory evidence. There is no direct evidence for military tests were the cause, and the Soviet government denied that it could have been, but the Soviet government denied a lot of things. The radiation spread would have affected all of the hikers equally and their equipment, not just the few that it was found on. And the injuries don't align with injuries associated with bombs. Job bombs often cause soft tissue trauma as well as, the bigger bone breaks and things. Now we get on to a little bit of a out there one so the paradoxical undressing that I talked about earlier, where some of them were found in their underwear or whatever. This could be explained, as I said, by hypothermia. Can cause paradoxical undressing because when your body systems are messed up, they think you're roasting when you're actually freezing. Supporting evidence for this is 6 of the 9 hikers died of hypothermia. The contradictory evidence is some of the hikers had additional clothing afterwards, suggesting that they were trying to stay warm rather than stripping off. Also, it doesn't explain the injuries at all, that part, and it doesn't explain why some of the group had more clothes and some of the others didn't, which shows some logic in the situation. Now, I think you will remember I mentioned the Mansi tribe, and there's a theory that the Mansi tribe attacked them for trespassing. This was initially suspected because the hikers were on their land. There was a symbolic structure nearby to the tent called a chum, which is created at the time of a sacrifice. Contradictory evidence is that there's a lack of evidence, there's a lack of signs of struggle or other tracks to suggest that an attack occurred, and the injuries do not appear to have been caused by human violence, since the forces of the impact of the bones would have resulted in soft tissue damage or bruises, which wasn't the case, and the Mansi people are known to be peaceful and do not perform human sacrifices, apparently. The Yeti attack theory. Here we go with the really, really out there. And there's actually one more in a minute that is also really, really out there. Basically, this one says a large and violent creature attacked the hikers, aka a Yeti. This can be supported by unusual injuries, and we don't know how a Yeti could attack a person. This could explain why the injuries were as unusual as they were, and a photo taken of the group could be interpreted as having a Yeti in the background, but again, it's a grainy photo, it's open to interpretation. There are a lack of other Yeti tracks or any other big massive tracks, and it doesn't explain the radiation. So that knocks that one. And I said that one was kind of out there. This one, there is also an alien involvement theory where the hikers were either attacked or influenced by extraterrestrials. The supporting evidence is, again, those glowing orbs could be interpreted as UFOs, and there's damaged film in the camera that was recovered, which some people believe could have been caused by a massive light exposure from a UFO. And the unusual injuries are also really, really weird. As I keep saying, the unusual injuries could have been caused by whatever way an alien could attack. And the single file walk be explained by the hikers being put into a trance by, again, the aliens. However, contradictory evidence here is that there's a lack of evidence. Nobody has any evidence for this. It's just an idea, and the fact that it's completely off the wall. And then you just have to think it could literally just be psychological thing. So infrasound, as we mentioned previously, or maybe even just mass panic, and then cutting out of the tent, and the fact that they got disorientated supports a mass panic theory. But then it is unlikely that all 9 hikers would experience the same phenomena and react in the same way if it was just a psychological explanation. It doesn't explain the injuries very well, and there are decisions such as the fire and the stashing of food and cutting out of the tent that are very rational decisions, which, if there was a psychological element to it, would be inexplicable. So back to the military test theory, kind of. There is a theory that no matter what happened, it was a Soviet cover-up. Supporting evidence of this is, of course, as I mentioned, the initial secrecy, the inconsistency, which means if you look at the reports, there were inconsistencies between official reports and the autopsies. And some reports stated that there were military boot footprints found near the site. And also then, aside from that, the fact that all the reports were suppressed for months, as you could see by the timeline I said, and then also the initial investigator Lev Nikitich Ivanov was ordered to dismiss the claim of seeing flying spheres, which could be military. The lack of a direct cause doesn't provide a direct cause of death. They haven't explained that part of it. And also, concealing information about domestic incidents was a standard procedure in the USSR, and the files were eventually released, so that bit about initial secrecy is just standard practice at the time. Now we get on to the very last one. I mentioned Zolotaryov was a creepy creature. So there is a theory that Semyon Zolotaryov was not just a hiker, but possibly a KGB operative or informant who was assigned to monitor the group or participate in a secret military test. The supporting evidence for this is his age and his experience. Zolotaryov was 38 years old. As I said previously, all the others were in their early 20s. And he was a veteran of World War II with experience in similar expeditions. Also, he was added at the last second after the initial route had been approved for 10 hikers. He had been certified to go with another expedition group of a similar difficulty. The mad thing is nobody knows who this Zolotaryov guy actually is, because DNA analysis didn't reveal any similarity to the DNA of any so-called living relatives, and his name was not on the list of those buried at the Ivanovskaya cemetery where he was reportedly buried. His remains were exhumed in 2018, which suggests that more importance was given to his case than the others. Zolotaryov's first name was Semyon, but for unknown reasons he asked to be called Sasha, which is a Russian short form of the name Alexander. And some speculate that Zolotaryov may have been assigned to the group to monitor their activities or take part in secret military tests, and was possibly a KGB operative and informant, just to nail that down. However, there is contradictory evidence. For example, the lack of evidence, because there is no definitive proof of any documents with linking him to the KGB or any other intelligence agency. Most of this theory surrounds circumstantial evidence and discrepancies, and his age and experience might be explained by his being a veteran, and the last-minute addition could be due to him having the proper qualifications to take a part in a more difficult expedition. The use of an alias was not an uncommon practice in Russia at the time. So, tell me what you think. I've just told you about the history of the Dyatlov Pass incident, and now you tell me in the comments or Instagram comment or whatever way you want to contact me. Tell me what you think of what actually happened in 1959 in the Dyatlov Pass. Hey, just before you go, please like this podcast, rate it 5 stars if you can, and then also comment if you can, something nice or any advice you have, and share this with anyone who you think might be interested in either history or heritage. And it's not just Irish focus, it's international focus as well. So, thank you.